This is the Mormon Mixed Faith Marriage Podcast with certified life coach Brooke Booth, episode number 102. Today's episode, I have a guest with me. Her name is Suzette Halterman, and she is also an expert in the mixed faith marriage world. She's a colleague of mine. She's trained as a therapist, and I want to hear more about this from her. And she practices as a coach, which I think is a fantastic mix. Just my opinion on that. She lives in Colorado. She has 4 kids and a husband just like me. Her training and background are different than mine. And so I really wanted her to come onto the podcast so we can learn about her approach to mixed faith marriage, hear her own story, what tools she found really works for her and her clients. And I also want to talk to her a little bit about, I don't think I told you this, but surprise, Suzette, I want to talk to you a little bit about working with couples, because I know that's like your specialty and your jam is to work with couples. I probably want to pick your brain a little bit about that too. But before we get started on like the substance here, anything you want to add about your background?
No, I mean, I'll get into it as we talk, but I think you did that's a great overview.
Okay, that's Suzette. Okay, tell me what got you into coaching. I know you started your training, your education as therapist.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a little bit about that education, because I know becoming a therapist, like there's several different routes you can go down. What was your route, and then what got you into coaching?
Yeah, so I went to grad school for marriage and family therapy, and I was starting towards my licensure because you have to do all this. There's a bunch of hoops, tons of hoops you have to jump through. So I was starting in that, but every state is different. And at the time, we were newly married. My husband's training was taking him all over. So we were moving and I didn't know what state we were going to end up. So I kind of just put a pause on that, like thinking, well, whenever we settle down somewhere and I know what state we're going to be living in permanently, then I'll get my license there. Well, then I got, was having kids, raising kids, and that took up many years. So I stayed home with them. And then when they got a little older, I wanted to kind of get back into this, and working with couples has always been my dream. It's always been something I wanted to do. And so I was like, okay, let me get back, let me finish, get my supervision. And I just, when you want to work with couples, the truth about the therapy world is it's a really hard route to take. You have to kind of get your supervision hours and cut your teeth in all the places, like the substance abuse and the different, it's just harder. It's harder to find the jobs where you can get the supervision, where you don't have to have your license, but you can be working towards it, and you're working with couples because you can't have a private practice. Anyway, it was just messy. And I was like, I want to work with couples. And I found that there was other ways that could train me to work with couples. So I was like, why should I spend years like going through supervision to do all this stuff I don't want to do when I just want to do couples? And so I sought out like a relationship coaching specifically, because this particular program that I went through had a couples coaching training. It was actually a therapist doing the training, and her husband's a coach, she's a therapist. And that was through the relationship school. So that's where I started. And then I realized I could do all these other couple specific training as a coach. So I was like, sign me up for every couples training. So basically I could have spent years, working with individuals, getting supervision to become a therapist. And then I would have also had to get the same training. Or I could just become a coach and do all this training in exactly what I want to do to get good at exactly what I want to do and not have to like spend all this time. So anyway, that's like a long story of why I ended up, there's a lot of things I like about coaching, and that the insurance, because I don't have to deal with insurance, they don't dictate how many sessions, length of sessions, like, so a lot more flexibility. And I can specialize. Therapists, you have to work with like people in your state, because of all the insurance. And so you can't really specialize. Like I live in a small town. If I was to just do mixed faith marriage coaching in my town in Colorado, like I couldn't, make enough money. So because I can just do my specialty, I can pull from people from all over the world, and it's harder to do that as a therapist. So there was things about coaching that drew me to that, because I love the idea of specializing. I think it's harder therapists that are like, I do individuals, I do eating disorders, I do depression, and I work with teens, and I work with couples. I'm like, there's so much to know about every single one of those. Like you can't know that. So I'm all about specialize. And it's easier to specialize as a coach. So that was a lot to answer that question.
So many thoughts on this. I'm a big believer in specializing too, because I think you can be better for your clients when you have like, oh, I've seen this problem before several times,
Yeah.
and let's work on it together, instead of like, well, I just got off a call with somebody with an eating disorder and now let's talk about your marriage. Like,
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of specializing too. I've seen it. There's power in developing expertise. There really is.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so many questions. Let's talk a little bit about your training, and then I want to talk about working with couples, because my experience is I work with both individuals and couples, and
Mhm.
I have any clients have the opinions of whether they want to work individual as couples, and I do too. So I want to hear yours, like, but tell me a little bit about your training, and then tell me why you love working with couples. So
Mhm.
I know you did this, your background's in therapy, you have, it's like a marriage and family therapy.
Mhm.
And then tell me about your coach training. I'm really interested in this, specifically
Yeah.
around couples.
So yeah, so my coach training was with Jason Gaddis at the Relationship School. He's got a podcast. I love his work. So I happened to just stumble upon his work, and I was like, I love his approach. And that's why I just kind of started through there. And then I got to know his wife, and then they happened to be doing this couples training. So she's a certified PACT therapist, which is a particular form of couples therapy. So they developed a coaching program that takes a lot of PACT therapy couples principles, and they just developed a coaching program with that. So I did that whole thing. And then after that, I was like, so I was working with couples then, but I realized I still like, you can never know enough about how to work with couples because they're super complicated. So I got into it and I was like, I don't feel confident yet.
Yeah, couple work and individual work is like night and day, in my
Yeah.
opinion.
It's totally, it is a craft. I am finding it is a total craft. So I sought out, I trained at the Gottman Institute because the Gottmans have all the research, like what makes couples work. And I really loved some of their work about incompatibility, because as I was doing this work and in my own mixed faith marriage journey, like that just kept coming up with people like, we're so incompatible. And I knew the Gottmans had a lot of work around what helps couples thrive. And so I trained with them, and I went to the Couples Institute to train with Ellen Bader, specifically because her whole model she's developed is how do you be two individual people and still be connected? Like hers is a differentiation model. So I was like, yes, I want to learn everything I can about that, because that's like so relevant to mixed faith marriages and all marriages. And I love that. So I trained with her. I did that for a year. And then right now I'm training with Terry Real to do RLT, which is a specific form of couples work. And again, like you can be a coach, you can be a therapist and still get this training. And it's fantastic for dealing with some of the deeper stuff that emerges with couples. So yeah, again, it's like, it's more just craving my own desire to really work well with couples and be an expert in couples. Like that's why I'm doing it. I am a training, like nerd, like send me to end, like I could just go to trainings all the time and I would love it. Like I just love to learn about couples work. I don't know why. It's kind of just weird. Like that's where I nerd out on. I don't know.
I understand the geek appeal. I really do. I'm just wrapping up a training. I spent, she's probably 4 to 6 months on. It has to do with it's called like advanced certification in feminist coaching. I think that's the full name of it. But why I chose this, I was very, very like thoughtful in choosing this, because I see in so much of the couples work, like the impact of inequality, the impact of like, use the patriarchy word
Yeah.
here. And I see that impacting relationships on such a consistent basis that I was like, we gotta learn.
Yeah. Again, it's specialty, right? Let me pick the courses and the certifications that help me do my certain specialty even better, that expand my knowledge. Totally.
Okay, before we move on and talk more about mixed faith work, because I think this is going to tie directly into that and give us a good segue, I want to talk about differentiation, because you brought that up. And like, I think this is something I see so often in mixed faith marriages is two people are differentiated from each other. Sometimes it doesn't start that way. And I have this way I talk about differentiation is it's a lovely word. We're like, oh, that's a good thing. That sounds like a fancy, important word. But when it actually happens, it's extremely like chaotic, disruptive, challenging experience. Why don't you speak, if you don't mind, about how people differentiate in a marriage successfully. That's a big question,
Yes.
but you brought
No,
it
it's
up.
okay. Yeah. Yeah, no, I love to talk about this. So a lot of people, especially in mixed faith marriages, confuse differentiation with individuation. Like, I'm becoming my own individual person. Individuation is finding kind of your own self-esteem, your own sense of worth. And you can do that inside or outside of a relationship, right? You can do it with career. You can do it with church. Like, I'm suddenly really interested in church history and I'm like passionate about learning this and I'm want to listen to all this stuff. So it's like I'm becoming my own person. You can do that inside or outside of a relationship. Differentiation
Wait, let
is
me
the
pause. So it's like
yeah.
saying, I like broccoli. I
Yeah.
prefer it over green beans.
Yeah. We're always differentiate. I mean, we're always individuating, right? Throughout our life. Like, who am I? What gives me like passion and joy? And where does my self-esteem come from? And what are my interests? Like, that changes, right? Adolescence or individuating. Differentiation is this ongoing process of defining who we are. So individuation is like, I got to figure out who I am, and I can do that whether I'm with you or whether I'm not. But differentiation is I have to define who I am to you and allow you to do the same. So it's more of a, we are our own distinct person and we have to be in connection and relationship with each other. So a lot of mixed faith marriages are like, yeah, I'm differentiating because I'm deciding what I put in my body and what my religious view is. And it's like, no, that part of that plays into differentiation. That's you individuating, but now you have to communicate that. And to do that, this takes like a truckload of mature relationship skills, because I can't just be disrespectful and, well, I want to do this. It's like, what are my values? What's important to me? And can I communicate that to you non-reactively and tolerate that you might not agree with me? That is the work of differentiation.
That is not easy work. And I'm even thinking before you can even get there, you
Mhm.
have to like have that self-introspection, that self-discovery, and
Mhm.
be comfortable with what you're learning about yourself before you can even effectively have those conversations that you're describing here.
Totally. It is mature relationship skill. Like, so yeah, differentiation is a big word and it just involves a lot of really like high level mature skills of introspection, knowing what you feel, tolerating discomfort, right? Because if I'm going to reveal myself to you, that's like vulnerability. You have to be able to be vulnerable. You have to tolerate the discomfort of not getting that validation back, because you're allowing the other person to do the same, right? Define who they are, for them to say, I don't believe that. I don't think that. Like, well, then you automatically can get out of differentiation and be like, well, I'm angry that you don't agree with me. And
I say this all the time, people will take it very personally.
Mhm.
They'll feel attacked, they'll feel like their safety is threatened or their
Yes,
belief system,
totally.
which ties into their safety. And then we're not usually exercising what you're calling here like mature emotional
Yeah,
skills.
you have to have boundaries. Like, you have to have boundaries that contain, like, I don't need to force you to think differently. And I can communicate without like criticizing and belittling you. Like, those are all containing boundaries. You have to have boundaries to like protect yourself so that you don't like fall apart just because, yeah, or like you don't go into shame, or you don't go just because somebody else thinks differently. Like, these are super hard skills. So that's why differentiation is really hard, because you can't nail it down to like, this is the differentiation skill. It's like a whole bunch of skills, and differentiation is just like a broad umbrella term.
That's how I talk about communication. People
Yeah.
are like, I want to learn communication. I'm like, okay, welcome to the next 10 years of your life.
Right.
Like, it's gonna take a minute to like learn these skills. It's
Mm-hmm.
such a great way of putting it. Okay, let's talk about how this applies to a mixed faith marriage. And we
Mm-hmm.
have been, and then I want to talk about some of your favorite tools, but this is something I see a ton is learning these skills you're describing here, whether it's differentiating or some other topic. Um, this isn't easy to learn these skills. How do you help people start to like learn, skills that have maybe 120 subparts?
Yeah. This is exactly why I like working with couples, because you can do it in real time. Like, you watch them talk and you see the other person starting to get elevated and going into intellectual, like, I'm going to prove all the reasons I'm right. And then like, okay, what is happening right here? Do you feel how you're getting defensive? Do you feel how you've stopped like being present with your partner? Like, so I like working with couples because it's like very real time. Like you can see the reactivity. If you're just working with like a therapist or a coach individually, you're not going to get activated in the moment. You're talking about stuff like in the past, like this happened last week, and you might get a little activated. But when you're doing couples and it's like, okay, I have them turn towards each other, like turn towards each other and start talking about, whatever it is we're working on. And you can see what happens and see how your boundaries suddenly disappear and you go into people pleasing and like, let's talk about that. Where does this come from? And so it's like real time. You do it in real time. Just we work on speaking, we work on listening, we work on a lot of containing your own reactivity, like tolerating discomfort. We just do it in the moment, in the conversations. Compromising, that's a differentiation skill because you have to tolerate the other person getting some of what they want, and you have to tolerate give and take. You can't, like, those are all very mature skills. So yeah, we just work on it little by little in real time.
What I'm thinking is, so I do both individual and couple. And I like if in the ideal world, I like people to have both.
Mm-hmm.
Like if they have the couple work, I consider it more, I call it a sledgehammer, but I can see where it like activates people and like brings the things right to the surface.
Yeah.
And then I take what they like, what came up there, and let's go to your individual session
Yeah.
and help you like clean it up and
Mm-hmm.
work through some stuff so you can go back as a couple and
Really.
from a more mature point of view,
Mm-hmm.
from a more conscious, deliberate point of view, and keep moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's some
That's
really,
it's that's a really powerful model. Yeah. And some people work that way. It's like we do some couples and we do some individuals to work on whatever came up as a couple. Yeah.
and I also realize like this is also a position of privilege, like people that have the resources and time to do that,
Mhm.
like that's not everybody.
Yeah. Well, and that's part of, like, I don't prefer individual work for that reason. Like I will work with individuals, but usually only if I at least met the spouse, because most of the time what people bring in an individual session and they say is the problem is not the problem, because they are only seeing it through their perspective. And I made that mistake so many times before I really got into couples work, where I would do individual sessions and it's like, they're just like, oh, my partner is so this and they're so stubborn and they can't be. And then you get them in session and you see that actually this person won't let their partner complete a sentence, and they go so like, they become so contemptuous and like, I'm like, no, this is a two-sided problem here, but they can't see it. People can't see their own contribution to the dynamic, like 99% of the time. So that's the danger of only individual work, is you're just, you really can't see the whole picture. So yeah, I think couples work is fabulous to see the big picture. And then yeah, like I do often refer people, go get some individual help for this thing, like, but yeah, but you got to understand the bigger picture first.
Yeah. I love to tell my clients is if I'm working one-on-one, is I don't tell them this in direct words, but as my training is I question everything. Like I know everything they're telling me is through their own lens.
Yeah.
I have one coaching clients out there. This is no disrespect to you, but this is just how the human brain works. She's like, just consider that they're all like a pathological liar.
Oh yeah.
Because we just don't see what's
No,
happening.
they only see what they want to see, right? And they'll so.
Like whenever a client comes to me and they're like, my spouse, blah, 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 blah. I'm like,
Mhm.
I'm like, I totally believe them. I totally
Yeah.
believe this is their
So that's
perspective.
from their perspective. That's the reality. And there's much more happening.
Yeah, I think that's the power of coaching or therapy or whatever, is because over here is a third party. Like their brain is believing everything and seeing it as like capital T truth. And as a third party, we're able to be like, okay, like let's question, let's unpack, let's look at this from another angle, let's see what else might be going on here. And I think that's probably a hallmark of like this emotional, mature approach that you're
Mhm.
about.
Yeah.
Okay, what are your favorite tools to use with your couple work when you're specifically working with like a mixed faith marriage couple?
Yeah. Well, speaking and listening is huge. Learning how to speak maturely without criticism, learning how to speak from, this is what I value, this is what's important to me, like learning to speak from the I, and learning how to listen learning how to listen is really hard in mixed faith marriages, because you think, well, I was part of that faith, so I know what they think and feel, like I get it. But no, like listening to what it's like through their lens and really being able to shift your perspective. Like, why is this important to them? What do they value that's influencing this? What is their childhood experiences? What is their background? What is their family of origin like that's influencing how they see this? Like, listening deeply is it's a skill that you have to put a lot of effort into doing well. So I think those are the two big ones. If people can speak and listen effectively, it eliminates like 95 or 99% of problems, I think, because you can work stuff out. You can figure it out together.
I'm totally going to second this, and I'm going to add just a little bit more like substance to it, because I'd say like the speaking, what I find clients struggle learning how to speak is because they've never given themselves permission to even know what it is that's true for them or authentic to them, or like they never really explored their preferences. The women a lot, but men too.
Yeah.
Where they don't explore those preferences.
Totally. And again, this is differentiation work, because you have to really, a lot of people stay surface level. They start going into the facts. Well, the church this and polygamy this and blah, blah, blah. Like, no, like we got to drop way deep. Like, why is it important to you? I want to know like all the things. I do a lot of childhood family of origin work, because all of that influences why things are triggering for people, right? Like, it's not just that polygamy is triggering to you. Like, let's go into what it was like for you being raised, hearing these things or internalizing these messages, or why is it so scary for you to like speak up vulnerably about, because vulnerability is huge. That's why people stay on surface level and facts and arguing about church history and stuff. Like, that's easier than being really vulnerable about like their own
Easier.
stuff.
And I say this to clients all the time. I'm like, it's just easier to not like do the work and find out what your preferences are and be able to speak them in the short term. It's easier in the short term, but if we're playing the long game here, and so that takes approach. Okay, you know what I'm thinking about the listening piece. So what I'm hearing when you say that is really it's an act of learning how to not judge and like throw up the defensive responses or feeling the personal attack, but just like letting them and listen without judging what they're saying or feeling attacked by what they're saying. I call it like the criticism defensiveness cycle, and it kicks in like so fast. And like I can see like softening the critical approach and then listening without judgment, then you're avoiding that criticism defense cycle, which is,
and there's so many things that play into couples that keep them from doing that, right? Like past resentments and hurts. Like I'm not going to validate your perspective or give that kind of empathy to you because you've hurt me in the past. I'm going to withhold that. There's that. There can be like, if you come from a conflict avoidant family, like to even know how to do that, to like so there's so much going on. It sounds so simple, like let's speaking and listening, but no, like our brains get hijacked.
It's completely like learning a foreign language.
Oh yeah. And filtering out all of your trauma.
Like, right, and a foreign language that sounds like dangerous.
Yeah, right. So a lot of couples work is unearthing the underlying blueprints around what relationships look like, the underlying trauma around trust, dependability, vulnerability, because our brains are wired to pull from past experiences twice as much as they are in the present. And so really there's so much sorting out to do to even get to a place where you can like have two people that are present in the moment speaking and listening, because our brains are just, they just hijack everything and it's a mess.
They do. Okay. I totally agree with you on that. I think those two tools, if people learn those, it would just be, I wouldn't say smooth sailing, but like they would just be
help a lot.
the harbor and out into the open water with so much more ease. Tell me, how would you describe coaching versus therapy? Because you sort of have a window into both. I mean, I've experienced both. I've never been a therapist. I've been in a lot of therapy, but how would you describe it from your point of view?
I think other people will give different answers, like, oh, coaching is present centered, and no, like I'm a coach and I do a ton of childhood family of origin work. The biggest difference is simply diagnosing mental health disorders. Therapists are trained to do that, coaches are not. But otherwise, like I sit in the same class as a coach with other therapists. We're learning the same material of working with couples. So a lot of people have the same training. It's simply that therapists, insurance pays for therapy. And for insurance to pay, it has to be a medical necessity, which means there has to be a diagnosis, which means you have to use the DSM, the Diagnostical and Statistical Manual. And so therapists are trained to give a diagnosis. So what most people don't know is if you go into couples therapy, it has to be medically necessary for insurance to pay for it. So they actually have to give somebody a diagnosis, like, okay, this person is the identified patient. Their diagnosis is adjustment disorder. So I therefore can do couples therapy with the patient because it's medically necessary, right? So that is the only difference. Therapists are allowed to diagnose. They're allowed to deal with depression or the sexual abuse or the PTSD, right? So I don't deal with mental health issues. If people come to me, and I've had this happen before, like suddenly it comes out that actually they were in Iraq war and it's around the anniversary of that, and their PTSD symptoms are majorly getting in the way of their ability to speak and listen because they're so triggered all the time. I refer out to a therapist. Like, I'm not going to do PTSD work. I can work on how that's showing up in your relationship, but I'm not going to treat your PTSD. I'm not trained in EMDR to do depression. I don't do all of that stuff. So to me, that is the only difference, is the diagnosing of mental health disorders. And so I don't deal, like, I will deal with how abuse or trauma is showing up to impact your relationship, but I'm not going to deal with your actual abuse. Like, I'm not going to treat your abuse.
This is one of the best distinctions, like ways of describing the difference between coaching and therapy I've ever heard. So like, excellent job. Like, this is one of the best ways I've heard it described. The way I think about it is like, yes, yes, and yes to everything you said. I was thinking about that certification I'm just finishing up. Half therapists, well, maybe like a half therapists, maybe a quarter coaches and a quarter physicians. That was like the cohort I was in. And I'm like, oh, you're right. We did all have the same training.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, that's actually true. Like,
Yeah.
it was set up to train all of these people on these particular skills so they could serve their clientele better. The other thing I think about a lot is I also, just like you, if I see PTSD or stuff like that, I'm like, go find somebody who does trauma informed can help you with those modalities. EMDR, I know there's a few other type. That is something I'm always happy to refer people out. And I think that's probably like the main distinction I do with coaching and therapy, is like, I don't do trauma work. Now I can talk about what you make it mean today in your marriage, and there's a whole wealth of coaching you can do about that I think is extremely valuable. But like, addressing actual trauma,
I'm not gonna, we're not gonna diagnose it. We're not gonna
the therapist
deal with it.
Yeah. And I would say I've worked with enough clients that the two together can be a really powerful tool if you have resources for that. So if you can get a therapist to help you on some of the trauma things, and then a coach to help you on the coaching things, that can also be a really great tool.
Totally.
It's tools really complement each other, I find, and don't distract or oppose each other. So the more tools you have in your toolbox, then the more
exactly. There's no wrong way to go. Like, start somewhere. If you need to then move to some trauma work for a while, and then if you need to do some couples work for a while, like there's no end to the growth that is needed to make relationships work well. So
it's so true. Like, I'm thinking about my own journey. Obviously, I've done a lot of coaching because that's the world I know best, but I've done a fair amount of one-on-one therapy. Right now, my husband and I are in couples therapy. We're on our second therapist because they're just a little bit different. We're just trying on a new one. Oh, great. Like, it's all necessary. I'm like, come in all the help and support.
Right. Because the fact that we think that we can do this thing called relationships, like just by winging it, is crazy now that I know what I know about relationships. And like, it's insane that we just think that we can figure this out.
Which I totally did. I was 24 when I got married, and I was pretty sure that it would just be like, figure it out as you go.
Right. Like we love each other. It's all fine. We'll work it out. We're two capable, smart individuals.
Right. And that thing threw me for a loop for a lot. That thought, we're two capable, smart individuals. Because like my husband and I are. Like you and your husband, educated, you got the pedigree, you've got the credentials, you got the shiny plaques on the walls. My husband and I do too. And I'd be like, well, we're pretty smart. I can figure out complex like mergers and acquisitions. Shouldn't I be able to figure this out?
Right.
And yes, and it doesn't hurt to get somebody with you.
Because it's not a logical thing. We're not figuring stuff out. We're dealing with something totally different. It's not a puzzle to be fixed. It's emotions, it's trauma, it's family history, it's everything, and a brain that does stuff in like 1/40th of a second before we even have time to like cognitively think, what am I doing in this moment? Yeah.
Right. I didn't touch too much on your story. Before we wrap up, I want to hear a little bit about your story. Like, I know you're in a mixed faith marriage, and I didn't know how much you're comfortable sharing, but do you want to tell us a little bit about your story on how you found yourself in a mixed faith marriage? I know that people are always hearing.
No, so I did all the things, served a mission, married in the temple, all graduated from BYU. And it wasn't until like 15 years into my marriage. It was actually when I was starting my coaching training, just learning about relationships. I don't know, just some social issues. I kind of dug deeper into that, and I was having to do my own work, like, because when you do coaching work, like you do a ton of your own work. So I was doing a lot of work around my own stuff, and my own blocks and what shaped me. Anyway, it all kind of just came crashing down, and it just shifted my faith. But my husband is still believing. I wouldn't say he's like a super hardcore person. Like I was the one who was really kind of spiritually leading the family. My husband works in the emergency room. Like he only goes to church twice a month because he works 2 Sundays a month anyway. But it is still a part of his belief system and what's important to him and what he values. And so then I was like, shoot, how do we do this? And even with my training, it was still like, I don't know how to do this. And so that's also when I was like training with the Gottmans, they were teaching like, okay, this is how you do compromise. And I was like, oh, okay, let me try that. And it like made things so smooth and beautiful. Like now we can compromise. And then I was like training at this other place, like this is all about differentiation. And this is how we speak and listen. So I was like, I almost feel like my story is not unfair because I was just having all this stuff handed to me like on a silver platter by all these experts, like, the couples experts in the world, like, here's how you do this. And it was always right when I needed it. And so I would try it and it would like be beautiful. And I was like, oh, see, this is not so bad, So I almost hesitate to share my story because it's like, we did not struggle through it. It was like, I had the world's experts just telling me, like whispering in my ear, like, oh, here's how you do this. But that's what I want to give to other people. Like, you don't have to struggle through it. There's tons of stuff. Like, this is a workable solution. You have to be able to differentiate. You have to work on your own stuff. It's not easy, but it's like, if you get some help to work through it, it is totally doable. So my husband and I, like, that is not the challenging part of my life anymore. Like, our mixed faith marriage, like we can navigate it as parents, like we can talk about stuff to each other. Raising a teenager right now is like a hard thing for me. So I'm trying to like reapply all this stuff I learned through my mixed faith marriage of like raising a teenager, like how to speak, how to listen without being reactive and like needing to control. Oh my gosh, like how to not lecture.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's a dose of humility, like, oh, I really actually suck at these skills sometimes, like a lot of times when I'm doing them with my 14-year-old. So yeah.
Your story is fascinating to me because my timeline is almost identical. Like Mission BYU, like all that, very similar. 15 years into our marriage is about when my faith transition happened. And I had already been in coaching, but this is where it diverges. So I had already been in the coaching world a little bit. So it was really helpful because like, okay, I have some tools, but I still struggle. I still struggled, like, not because there's anything wrong with the tools, but like I struggled learning how to apply the tools.
Yeah.
And to like be that mature person you were talking about earlier, like that was not easy for me to to just like be told and understand things and then to apply them. I'm glad it was easy for you. I really am.
Well, it wouldn't have been, but I was in a good place doing my own works, right?
But like I think about like, I mean, I've been wearing Gottman for decades, and like, but it was one thing for me to like theoretically understand the
Yeah.
tools, and a very different thing for me to actually apply the tools in real life,
Mhm.
real situations, and
Yeah.
being able to cross like bridge that the theoretical, because like I'm like I could get things.
Yeah.
Like, that's a great idea, but actually applying it, that was really like the skill set I needed. I needed like the practical application. But boy, when I got that dialed in, then yes, I experienced a
Yeah.
lot of like, oh, that kind of worked. Well, that was
Yeah.
actually really slick. Okay, I'm definitely
Yeah.
doing that again.
Right. So helpful. And it's hard then to see people who don't have that, don't know how to apply it or struggling to apply it. Yeah, when you see like it actually can take so much of the yuckiness, scariness, all of it out.
And you said something I have to just reiterate. It's like it is possible to have a
Yeah.
great marriage. Like that is, if I were to have like one thing that I like tattooed across my chest, it would be that, because I think so many people walk into this really like afraid it's not possible,
Mhm.
or they hold on to that like maybe this isn't going to work. I think really stepping into the idea that like this is just some
Yeah.
skills.
Well, totally. And the other most helpful thing for me was realizing this is not a mixed faith marriage problem. This is a marriage, a very normal, 100% normal marriage thing. Two different people have to differentiate and learn to connect. Like that is the story of pretty much every marriage, no matter what the topic. It could be sexual desire discrepancies. It's the same thing. Like we're really different. How do we connect? Money, like you're an introvert, I'm an extrovert. Like it's never ending. And I think that helps couples too, to know like, no, you're not some weird exception. Like this is what normal marriages have to go through 100% of the time with everyone.
People in some of my content, they'll be like, doesn't this just apply to all marriages? And I'll be like, uh-huh.
Exactly.
Uh-huh. And I'll say one more comment and then we'll wrap up. Is I like another point you had here, like about your teenager. I find the work we do on our marriages, on ourselves in this, it cross applies.
Mhm.
I tell people, they're like, what if we get divorced? I'm like, that's a possibility, but you're still going to have developed yourself in these skills and the greater capacity, and that will play out positively in so many other areas
Right.
of
You
your
still have to co-parent. You still have to like,
life. Go to work, talk to your sister, interact with your mother. Like they're all
Mhm.
relationships.
Yeah.
And like I just like to say, like, there's no wasted effort.
No, I agree.
Okay, this was a super fun conversation, and I
Yeah.
have maybe 3 more hours of questions just based on a few things you said here.
You and I can geek out on couples work stuff, but
Love to just
on our
dive
own.
into, but in honor of time and schedules, we'll wrap up. Any last thing you want to add that you would want to just tell people that you think would be just beneficial?
Oh,
And I didn't
no,
warn you about that, so I'm catching up.
no. There's always so much. I mean, I think I've already said it. It's not it's a normal problem. And I would probably the last thing is just relationships go through developmental stages just like humans do. Just like you go from childhood to adolescence to adulthood, has all these stages. Relationships go through the same thing. And one of those stages is differentiation, and like individuation and differentiation, and learning how to find a new way to connect that's not based on like we're the same person. Like that's an actual stage of relationships. All marriages go through it. Some go through it sooner, some go through it later. Some people, it takes a mixed faith marriage to push them through that stage.
I think sometimes a mixed faith marriage acts as a catalyst for some
Totally.
phases. And
Hmm.
I think that it's the problem, but it's just normal.
It's like going through teenagerhood. It sucks. It's miserable, but everybody's got to do it at some point, right? To become an adult. So relationships have to go through it too.
And like with teenagers, it doesn't like, yeah, there's pros and cons. Like I'm a
Hmm.
big fan of teenagers. I'm like,
Yeah.
love, love. And I like to look at it that way. And I think those parts of those phases, they are challenging, but they can also have some beautiful.
Yeah, there's a lot of beauty in them. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for your time, Suzette. This was
It was
delightful.
fun.
Okay. See you later.
Bye.